Hello and thank you for joining me on this rather impromptu video on the second channel. Just to give you a heads up before you start watching, if you haven't already, make sure to watch the river table video on the main channel, because this video that I'm doing now will have many spoilers for it, including deleted scenes, outtakes, and my thoughts on other things that happened. Alright? Before we get started, let me show you what I'm dealing with here. Oh, audio quality will improve when I sit down and use that, but for now it is just camera because this thing is dead. But yeah, it is a bloody bomb site in here at the moment. There is water everywhere because we've been testing this. I've just managed to knock over a glass that Liam was using to wash his paintbrushes for the Warhammer stuff he's doing. And we've also got a big old leak up here. So literally I'm surrounded by water everywhere at the moment. Just make my way back here. Okay, we haven't got chairs sorted yet. So this is a camp chair. Lovely. Right, what are we doing here? As you can see, I'm already putting the table to good use by gluing up knife blanks on it. More info on that soon. Okay, let's see. Switching to good audio. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, so what I thought I'd do with this video is basically watch over the video that's on the main channel of building this river table and then comment on like any extra things that didn't make it into the video, things that I think might be of interest to you, and you know, just have a general chat about why it's taken me this long to get the thing completed. Basically, the only reason I'm doing this video is because I'm frustrated that 3.5, maybe 4 months worth of work has been compiled down to one 20-minute video. I just want to squeeze what I can out of it because I left so much on the cutting room floor with it. It's, yeah, it just seems like a waste of 1.5 terabytes of footage, and that's not even an overstatement. Let's get watching. Rob, we've got a massive problem. Massive problem.
Well, what have you done now?
I've been stupid. I've been really stupid. I've set myself a goal of 500,000 subscribers by the end of 2021, and I'm only at... So just a butt in here real quick. To give you a heads up on this whole thing was filmed with just me and Rob. So all of these sort of panning shots you see, there's a cut in between them. So essentially what I'm saying is me and Rob were arguing with thin air at this point while the other one was filming. And not only that, we had to do it in about 2 hours as well. Rob, we've got a... Oh, I dropped my mic. No! But there's so many bits in it where you'll see there's lack of continuity. I think there's one bit where we left the script on the table. It was so rushed, but I think that's what makes it good in some ways.
Talk to Matt Estlea with it. It doesn't matter about subscribers, it doesn't matter about viewers. What matters is...
No, look, only a small percentage of my subscribers are actually subscribed.
They're not listening. It doesn't matter.
Hopefully most of you got the reference there.
About statistics.
No, you're not listening.
But just think about how far you've progressed. You've made so much sort of people love what you're doing. You don't have to be massive. Even the Lord loves you. The Lord already loves you. You've got me. I don't really know. I love you.
Oh, shut up. Come on. So, with that argument, me and Rob, we just had no idea what we were saying. No, you're not listening. No, you're buff. The whole thing was scripted other than that argument where we just basically offloaded and said whatever came top of mind. So I went down the route of like not being able to get a Tesla or get a girlfriend or collab with Mr. Beast, whereas Rob went down this route of God loving me, him loving me. We just had no idea where it was going, but it worked so well. Come on, I need to do something viral. Something viral. There's got to be something viral out there. A river table. I need to make a river table. I should probably say at this point as well. Obviously Rob is no longer working for me on the channel. He's gone off to be a content manager, something high up at Bosch. He's doing pretty well for himself, bastard. But I'm joking. Kind of. But yeah, basically this thing was filmed weeks after Rob had left, which is why you can still see like deflated balloons and stuff like that I still hadn't taken down from last time. The whole premise behind this video, if it was released on schedule and not 3 months later, well actually about 5 months later by the time Rob's left, was that he didn't leave to get a new job. He left because I killed him. But I feel like the joke's dead now because he's been gone so long, seemingly. Anyway. this so cool? Old shot from the Surrey Timbers video, link up here if you want to watch that. Called river table thing was, I knew I had to go big. So after a morning consisting of first-degree manslaughter, I found myself at Surrey Timbers, where after much deliberation, I came across these stunning boards of Pippi oak. So originally, with this table, I had... basically, I came up with the idea for it in December last year. And around that time, Surrey Timbers were posting big slabs and stuff on their website and their social media. And by the time it actually came to me being able to do the project, sometime around like May or something like that, they had these really nice Mappa burr slabs, which is, I think it's poplar. I might be wrong on that, but either way, it's called Mappa burr and it looks insane. But by the time I got there 1 week later, all of them had gone. In fact, there might have been a few left, but they were way too thin for this table. So, and I went there thinking I could just go and pick them up, being like an absolute idiot. But fortunately, they told me that they had some of this oak drying in a kiln. So they took me round to the container, had a look at it. It smelled amazing, by the way. But I could just see how beautiful the wood was. And it only had a week left of drying before I could go and take a proper look at it before purchasing it for a substantial amount and getting it delivered to my workshop the next day. All right. Surrey Timbers, they're good. Not to mention the fact they lugged it in for me as well. That words do not describe how heavy. Well, actually, I'm sure a measurement of weight would probably describe how heavy it is, but words alone do not. 8-long behemoths were delivered and wrestled into my workshop, only for me then to realise that we bought them in the wrong way. So I can script. Now, I haven't released the video at this point, but I know people were going to be like, well, how did you bring the boards in the wrong way when you could just cut them into smaller sections and flip them around the other way? Well, basically, what I meant by that is I took a picture of the boards at Surrey Timbers and was messing around on SketchUp with the images of them, sort of orienting them round and stuff like that, so I could do it with a digital image of the slabs rather than the actual slabs. And so before they came in the workshop, I already knew which way they needed to be. But I forgot about that when they were carrying it in. So, yeah. Oops. Thanks to my brother for that one. Did my brother into helping me carry them back out and in again. Thank you. After figuring out the orientation of the boards, I got them cut into smaller sections to make the flattening process easier. To flatten the slabs, I opted for a technique I hadn't personally used before. A router sled. This involved adhering the boards to my power tool workbench, I hope I've done this right. Clamping a track on either side of the bench, then making a sled to cradle a router as it's passed over the top. Think of this stage like backwards 3D printing. Sounds simple, right? Apparently not. Okay, so this shot was filmed weeks after doing any of the flattening. Basically, with this new style of editing I'm doing, I'm trying to like have it as like this dance between doing stuff and narrating and then cutting back to me presenting to camera, and all these things where I'm presenting to camera usually have to be done like weeks later when I'm sort of doing the edit. So what I did with this is picked up a load of shavings from the floor, threw them over my shoulders, picked up the router and just presented it, but I completely forgot to even put the milling cutter in the router. You can see in the background the gluing blocks that are resting on the power tool workbench because I was preparing to glue it up at this point. The whole video is just a con. It's not. It was quite possibly the worst experience of my life. It probably wasn't aided by the fact I decided to carry out the task while massively hungover one day. So as for the hangover, it wouldn't have been too bad if I hadn't have decided to cycle into the workshop that day, which was a 3.5, maybe 4 hour cycle over rolling hills in really hot heat. But basically, it was the end of year show at Rycotewood, had a few drinks, came back that night, and then got on my bike at like 5:30 that morning to get to the workshop to do this. Absolute idiot. But apart from that, I reckon of all the ways to screw this up, I managed to do about 90% of them, I reckon. We're talking things like the tracks not being parallel to the bench, or the bench I designed to avoid twisting, having a twist in it, or the router getting insanely hot due to the abuse I was giving it. My biggest screw up, however, was that I failed to realise that taking off too much material at once would result in the board warping. So as for all these screw ups, basically, I'd watched so many videos on using a router sled and like how to flatten slabs and stuff beforehand, but I just got the process in which to test and set up the table completely wrong. So basically I started off by getting the tracks at either side parallel to one another using a spirit level and got it bang on. But because the bench was twisted, that meant that the board was sitting at an angle underneath, so it was basically tapering it across its length and its width as well, but I wouldn't realise that until I was at the end of the slab. And even if I was able to sort of test the four corners before committing to do the whole thing, I could get it perfect on those four corners, but because I was taking off too much, it ended up distorting it, so by the time I got to the fourth corner, it had lifted anyway, and ended up tapering it as it was, so like... Oh, I had an absolute mare with it. And the reason the power tool bench was twisted, even though there's a torsion box on top, is because there is so much wood in the cabinets below that it's just pulled it down to whatever the shape of the floor is, which it turns out there is a huge dip by the miter saw. So what I should have done, now I think about it, was firstly check the bench wasn't twisted, get that leveled, then get the tracks leveled, then be more patient, or should I say just not do it when you're hungover. Because I reckon without these boards cupping and twisting and everything like that, this project could have been done in half the time and certainly half the stress, if not quicker, to be honest. But yeah, originally I put the cupping of these boards down to the router being really hot, and I had this whole demonstration sort of filmed and things that I ended up cutting from the video, because it later came to my attention it wasn't the heat from the router that was cooking the top of the board, therefore making it cup. It was just the fact that I was taking off too much. And like maybe that is a consequence of heat, because trust me, that router was like, you couldn't touch it, it was boiling. But I was probably taking off about 10 mil at a time in some places. You can see it in some of the shots how much I was taking off. I just didn't want to be there that day. Those of you who watched me on the live stream while I was doing that, God bless you, because yeah, you helped me through that so much. So let's just flash back a second to confirm my stupidity. What I started with was 2 thick boards that were cupped. Now after routing them, I'm left with 2 thin boards that were still cupped. Also, look at how little that cupped then compared to what it eventually ended up being. Like, I was spacing these boards up with stickers in between and making sure there was air circulation around them to ensure the cupping didn't get any worse, but as you saw later in the video, it got substantially worse than what you see there. Cupped. The one advantage I had is that these were now thin enough to clamp into being flat. To give the river a start and end point, I needed to create some insert. So just to talk a little bit about how I did this, because with the 2 slabs, it's very difficult to firstly get them parallel to one another when you haven't got a square edge or a straight edge to work from, because it's all veiny on both sides. Not only that, but you need to make sure they are the same length as one another. You need to make sure that the mitre at either end is cut at 90 degrees across the board's width, or else you're going to have it sort of flow down and then come in like a weird V shape like that. Basically, it's very hard getting these boards parallel while also making sure all of the cuts are square on either end. So that's what these lines are you see up the centre of each of the boards. I essentially worked out like what I roughly thought the centre line should be, drew that all the way along the board using the guide rail, and then bisected that line using geometry and like compasses and tram alarms and things like that in order to give me the 90-degree cut for the miters, or I should say the 90-degree line that I could then use to tilt the saw at 45 degrees to cut the miters. You probably get what I mean. But yeah, it was a real operation laying out those lines, because a tram alarm is only really useful on a flat surface when you're plotting out geometry like that. But if you're plotting it on cupped boards that were slowly getting more cupped the more you worked on them, yeah, you can imagine. It took so much longer than it should have just to draw some simple lines on the wood. Nightmare. That would join the 2 halves of the table together. These inserts would house the copper pipe assembly that was due to receive water from the pump below. Oh, for sake. Oh. Hello.
Hey Matt, it's Matt Cremona.
Okay, so these cameos I had planned from the start. I knew I wanted to get these guys involved with it. As of filming this video now, I'm still yet to do the one with Jonathan Katz-Moses and the one with Mark Spagnolo at the end. But yeah, I've met Matt Cremona a couple of times at Maker Central and at Yandles a couple of years ago, but I don't know, I got all flustered before calling him. I was bricking it. About to call Matt Cremona, pooing myself a little bit. I've spoken to him before. He's lovely and all that. This is not natural to me. I don't like collaborations. This should be the easy one. I've met him before. We're on good terms. Well, I'm on good terms with the other ones as well. In fact, now I've spoken to Jonathan Katz-Moses as well. I haven't spoken to Mark Spagnolo properly. Like, just messages. We ended up having a right odd laugh and just, like, brute forcing the entire conversation. This isn't the collaboration we had in mind, is it?
Now it's going to be difficult. Yeah, okay. Now I see why this is going to be hard.
Because I had a script all planned out, but then we just ended up freestyling it. And so there was points where Matt was like,
I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to say now.
No, I don't know either.
Well, good luck with that.
The first time I met him at Yandles, which, you know, like I said, it must have been like 2 or 3 years ago at this point, I said to him, we should do a collaboration. But when I asked him, we had no idea what we actually wanted to do for a collaboration back then. We just thought it would be a funny idea. He probably just said yes to be nice. But yeah, here we are. First collaboration with Matt Cremona is a phone call.
The other guy with the awesome hair. I just heard that you're trying to put a pump in the river table. Is that right?
Yeah, I literally just... He acted this so damn well. I was like holding back a smile because I think I was so nervous from it still. Like, I was very conscious about taking up too much of his time, and so like whatever was happening with my face, I just had to go with because I wasn't going to ask him to do it again. In fact, there were a couple of times where I said, can we try do that again? And it was just, it was like, wait, what did I say again? Nightmare. But very funny.
Because the river table is made from epoxy.
Well, why would you use epoxy when epoxy's one job is to be solid?
It gets solid and hard, so it gives you the illusion of it being a river table without the, the mess of having a table full of water in your house.
And how right he was about having the mess of a table full of water in my house. I tell you what, it's a good job that this conservatory leaks, because if this table causes any bubbling due to the amount of water that we've spilt on it while testing and the glass that I've just kicked over, at least I can blame it on the conservatory to the landlord rather than this big old table in the middle of the room. I'll just cover it in a blanket if they ever come for an inspection.
Okay, perfect. Bye.
No idea what he was on about. Anyway, as I was saying, to give the river consisting of water a start and end point, some inserts needed to be created. To do this, I strategically edge jointed the inserts at a slight angle to help negate the cupping on the boards, which you'll see later in the video why this was a stupid decision. So as for this being a stupid decision, obviously as you saw later in the video, or actually coming up now, I managed to split the boards. And I don't think I made it very clear why it was an issue that I jointed that middle section at an angle. But basically what it meant was that when the boards cupped, I had this flat section and then 2 cups going up like that, rather than it just be a consistent curve, which I guess reflecting on it now, I don't know which would be better, but I can tell you now that having it with a flat and then 2 cups like that was a nightmare to try and flatten and cut miters on and stuff like that. Like, at the time I was just kind of thinking, God, if it was just one consistent cup, at least I know what I'm dealing with. But either way, we saw what happened. The bottom of the waterfall had a large chamfer on the inside to help direct water back to the pump once it had completed its cycle. The insert at the top of the table had a 15mm hole drilled in it to accept the copper pipe assembly I was talking about before I was rudely interrupted. By this point, it had been a while since I'd done some real work. My soft, uncalloused hands were getting rather torn apart by the rough bark on these boards, so I began debarking it using a rasp, spoke shave and sandpaper. So that middle section you saw me gluing in there where the water's coming out, that broke so many times because you think you've got these 2 slabs that I attached at the other end, but they still have the ability to kind of twist and things like that. And that section at the end was basically relying on these 2 glue lines that were like the length of my hand, or length of my fingers, I should say. So yeah, the amount of times I was maneuvering the boards and it would just go and wrench them apart. It was so frustrating. I ended up chucking dominoes in there after the 4th time it broke. Why I didn't do it to begin with, I don't know, but I guess I was so frustrated with the project already at this point, I just wanted to glue it together and move on to something else rather than do something properly. Like, yeah, that was a bit annoying. With the boards jointed and debarked, I could begin thinking about cutting the miters, and by thinking, I mean putting off the job as long as possible via procrastination. Once I'd grown a pair, I got the track saw set up to do its thing. So this track saw, as you can see, is cordless, and I've maxed it out with this, which is asking quite a lot from a track saw as it is, let alone a cordless one. So is that my door? It is my door. Turns out it was an Amazon package. Sponges. These are the sponges that I will be using to prevent the waterfall from splashing at the bottom. I don't know if I'll be putting it in the video yet, so now you know. Basically, this is a aquarium sponge. It's made for like catching debris and things like that, and I thought it'd be quite good at, firstly, stopping splashes, and 2, stopping, like, acting as a filter basically for the pump. So there'll be one of these at the bottom of the waterfall, and then there'll be one of these at the top of the reservoir. This one is just a slightly denser one in case this one does not prevent the splashing as much as it should. As of narrating this, I still haven't jointed these miters together, so I have no idea if they're going to hold the boards flat or not. I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. Speaking of pulling the boards flat, what I like to do with these new styles of videos now is edit them as I go and then sort of refine the story at the end to try and make it a little bit more succinct, cut out scenes that aren't working too well. But yeah, genuinely, when I was narrating that, no idea. Absolutely no idea. It's also funny to see that that narration scene was only like a day after I had my hair cut, and now it's already grown to this length. Shows how long I've been working on this. Maybe this is what Mr. Cremona was on about.
Because a river table is made from epoxy.
Who knows? The legs of this underframe were also going to be used to contain the waterfall epoxy pour, although I didn't want to affix them in place at this point. So, to make the So this was hard to put into words, and I had a whole diagram thingy that I was going to show to like show the process and things, but it just made more sense to skim over it, so I'll explain it now. But essentially this pouring jig, as you can see, was constructed with the legs of the actual underframe, which were of course taped off and all that sort of stuff, and then melamine and like a melamine and OSB frame or front was attached to that through the bolt holes that would be used to attach the legs to the inside of the table. So there was no extra screw holes or no extra fixings in the legs that wouldn't be used later. I used the existing ones that were going to be there, which I thought was a little stroke of genius on my part, if I must say. Okay, here goes nothing. Oh god. But yeah, it turned out that sealing this was an utter nightmare, because as you'd expect, getting something to marry up like that up against the underside of a board with a mitre on the end while also being cupped. That's why I made the joke about 70% silicone, because it probably wasn't far off. 69% maybe. Before mixing the first pour, I sealed the edges with a thin layer of epoxy to prevent air bubbles from forming, cut it back to provide better adhesion for subsequent layers, then got mixing. This stuff is meant. So I had a real problem with this epoxy going cloudy, and it was hot when I was doing this. As you saw, it was like 31 degrees when the epoxy went exothermic. I've got more to say about that later. But yeah, this glass cast stuff, it should have been clear out the container as far as I was reading, but it always had this like cloudy tinge to it, which hasn't affected the clarity too much. I'm still yet to polish this, but yeah, even when I had it in a like a hot water bath and I was trying to decrystallize it, I just couldn't get it to go as clear as what the instructions seemed to state. I had real problems with it. Also, there was points where it like completely solidified. That's all liquid.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Look at the side.
Oh, tits. Oh, you don't think we can do it tonight.
Okay.
Although I failed to take into consideration the... actually, I'll just show you. Oh, dearie me. Oh, no. It's hot. Ow. Look. So the epoxy started shrinking, but it's obviously resisted by that and the jig underneath, and so it's split all the way along there. So about the epoxy shrinking, I was kind of in a mindless panic at the time. Epoxy apparently does shrink somewhat when it cures anyway, but obviously this has shrinked a substantial amount because it got very hot. Now the reason it got very hot was not only because it was 31 degrees C outside, but also because I had a you don't see it when I was doing the actual pour, but when I was letting it cure, I had like a board over the top. In fact, I think it was this piece of MDF I'm using as a gluing surface at the moment. But I had a piece of MDF propped up above it. There was still airflow underneath. I probably had about a 2-inch gap above the top of the table surface, which was like a 3-inch gap above the epoxy, of course. The thick pour of 25 millimeters on top of the ambient heat, on top of the fact that that heat wasn't able to properly escape, there wasn't much airflow, it's obviously what caused this. So, and this happened about 40 minutes after curing, and you should have felt how hot the MDF was. The reason I caught this was because I could smell the MDF on top cooking. It was so hot. And so when I touched it, it's like, I'm surprised it didn't sizzle my fingers. Awful. You can still kind of see this split as well, but I kind of like it as a it's like a little hidden detail in the table. It's sentimental to me by this point. It goes all the way up. That's a bit annoying, isn't it? So it turns out that not only is 31 degrees too hot for an inch thick epoxy pour, but it's also a little bit too hot for this old barnet as well. So I'm just going to go have that off. Oh, that is so much better. So this haircut scene, long-time viewers of this channel will know this is a common hold-up of mine. I don't like getting haircuts halfway through videos, let alone series. And so, for example, with the dovetail box project that I did on the free online woodworking school and the cabinet, all the projects I've done on them, you see my hair get progressively worse because I don't want there to be a video where suddenly I have short hair. I want it to be like consistent. But with this video, because it was taking so long, it's like, right, I need to get a haircut in there somewhere. And so I came up with this idea where basically I left the camera set up in the same place, filmed the first shot the first day, went home, slept, went and got my haircut the next morning, and then came into my workshop to press record, having not moved the camera at all. So I put all this preparation into it, making sure that I didn't move the camera, making sure that it was like the same lighting and all that sort of stuff. And then I forgot to wear the same t-shirt that day. This is how serious I take continuity. I spent about an hour and a half maybe keying out the t-shirt in my first shot so that it appeared all black when actually it had, I can't remember what was on it, maybe it was OSB or something like that. And then with the second shot the next day, after realizing that, oh damn, I'm wearing a different t-shirt, I basically put that t-shirt on backwards to make it look like it was plain black. So as I start to go out of shot, you can see the design that I was wearing on the back of me. I take this continuity too seriously. Nightmare. And the fact I'm pretty sure it's worsened the cupping on this. I mean, look at the state of that. But it's fine because I had a plan. I just needed to test it out first. I realise how much I sound like Jeremy Clarkson when I say that. It's fine because I have a plan. Remember earlier in the project I showed that it was possible to flatten the boards out by applying pressure across their width? Well, I decided to try doing that again. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go... What was that? Oh no! Oh, bum! I did think I might have been stressing it quite a bit. But that split goes all the way down. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's split clean in half. I mean, look, you can sort of see it here. Oh, that's a bit of a bummer, isn't it? How I dealt with this so well, I don't know. I don't give myself compliments or praise much, but one thing I do commend myself on is my ability to keep it cool when things go wrong. And if anything, just laugh at them. Because, and I guess it also probably helped that the project had a sort of stint of going quite well, and I was just expecting something to go wrong or blow up, which it did. So like there was certainly an element of anticipation there, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure how I managed to deal with it like that, but the reason I am somewhat thankful for this happening is that it forced me to then rip and re-edge joint the boards, whereas before I was just thinking about trying to force this into being flat like I previously had while gluing it together at the miters, and like, I mean, how long would that have lasted? I kind of knew this was the fix all along, I just wasn't in the mindset to do it, which is what caused me to push it too far and crack it in the first place. But with a successful second epoxy pour under my belt, I gained the motivation to get. There was not a chance I was cleaning up the back of that waterfall. There is still like little dips and stuff in it in places. I know I could do it with a router or something like that with a sled, but my experience with router sleds is done for the year. I'm not touching it again until 2022. But I got it cleaned up pretty well in the end. Yeah, you guessed it. I also managed to split the top by attempting to do the exact same thing with the clamps, bloody idiot. But fortunately... So yeah, basically all the video at this point had been focused on the waterfall component. Meanwhile, the actual main top itself was also cupping as much as the end of it. So yeah, like again, after splitting the waterfall end, I thought, well, the top's bigger, so it's going to be a little bit more structurally sound. I reckon that'll be able to deal with the bending. No, split that as well, and that was a big bang, but I didn't get that one on camera. It probably would have blown the mic. But that being said, the end at the pump didn't require ripping or rejoining or anything like that. There was a small cup in it when we glued it together, but it stayed pretty flat, which was pretty good. Not sure how that happened. Maybe I was patient when I was routing that one, and then when I got to these, I was just like ripping through it with the router. Who knows? But yeah, fortunately, only 2 of them split. It split on the underside of the tabletop where it'd be difficult to see, and it was way too big to even consider ripping and rejoining. Okay, so now we can talk about the leak underneath. That you only saw a little bit of it there. It leaked the entire length. The power tool bench was just covered in epoxy. That basically 80% of that first pour ended up dropping out the bottom, because I thought that I could just mask off the underside of the split all the way along and that would be absolutely fine. But I didn't realise how good epoxy is at working under tape and then just completely like melting the adhesion, or like it just makes it so slick. It's unbelievable. So like it looks okay at first, and then you see it start creeping across the tape from underneath and you're like, oh, I best fix that. So when you tape another bit on to kind of extend it, you end up squeegeeing the epoxy out, which then gives it a route out of the tape, and it just poured. So essentially what I had to do at the end was just call it quits and let it harden as it was, hoping that there was some epoxy in there still that would harden and seal it for doing a second layer. But I had no real way of testing if the first layer had plugged it properly until I poured in the second one. I really striked it lucky with that one, because it could have just drained out again. Once the epoxy had dried, I was able to start sanding away the excess, retrim the miters and add angled blocks in preparation for assembly. With the blocks in place, it was time to glue the miters, and what better time for Sarah to arrive from the US to help me out with it. She'd only been off the plane for little more than 3 hours. So this was true. Sarah was coming from the US to the UK originally for Makers Central, which was at the end of July. It was meant to be sort of towards the start of August, but she was coming like 2 weeks earlier for quarantine and things like that. But yeah, I picked her up from Heathrow. We went and got brunch and then just went straight into the workshop. And I can't even remember how long the layover was, but she basically went from JFK to Dublin to then Heathrow. And it was just this huge flight, and then 3 hours after landing was in my workshop. She did want to be there. When I say it was conscripted, it was only partially. But I think the video makes it fairly clear that Sarah's help was indispensable, for lack of a better word, because, you know, not only from a problem solving and having 2 brains to figure this thing out, but also just from moving the huge components around the workshop. Like how I thought I could do this by myself, no idea. Absolutely no idea. I already conscripted her into helping me get this thing together. Just to be on the safe side though, we added angled brackets to the inside of the mitre. And I will give Sarah credit for the angled brackets, that was her shout. I thought I'd just be able to get away with it, but I actually kind of like them. Normally I would sort of shy away from things like that, because I guess I've still got that element of furniture making snobbery in me, but I kind of like them. It gives it this kind of industrial look, and apart from anything, it settles my anxiety about these popping apart at some point in the future. I know cutting those blocks off with a saw and a multi-tool looks quite slow. Originally I just tried whacking one of them off with a hammer, but I ended up ripping out this huge chunk of grain by doing so. I'll round that.
Maybe, okay.
Yeah. It's like the first one we did, which is why we ended up doing it the slow way afterwards. The next job was the underframe. This, in theory, and one thing that is not too obvious with this project as well, is how long some of these operations took. So there was a quick cut there of Sarah sanding the inside of the miters, getting rid of the epoxy squeeze out. She was at that for hours cleaning up the inside of those miters, trying to get rid of epoxy squeeze out and things like that. And like later on with sanding the top and all these other things, some of those time lapses that are like 2-3 seconds were, I think the sanding of the tabletop took us 6 hours in the end. Yeah, you really don't get an idea of how long some of these operations took when it's condensed into 3 seconds. I guess that's the point of a time lapse, isn't it? Except from the fact I needed it to become part of the epoxy pour form for the top of the table, while also being completely detachable after the epoxy had dried. Surprise, surprise, little shot of Sally there. So the reason I wanted it to be completely detachable was purely for maneuverability, being able to get it into this place, because I knew that we had to loop it round the back garden gate thing. There's a huge bush out the front that if this was one big block, there'd be no chance we could loop it round that. So I needed to make it detachable for maneuverability, and also just to kind of strip some of the weight from it to make it easier to maneuver around as well. But if I could have had that permanently fixed in place, would have made the project so much easier. Oh, another knock at the door. That was the water guy. He was very complimentary on my table. I think, well, he's a water guy. He probably liked the fact there was a pump in it. So the reason we were planing with the electric planer then is because we were planing the top surface of the stretcher, and essentially we'd scribed it to match the profile of the underside of the table, because, as I think I've made clear, it wasn't flat. So I basically, we had to run a scribe line and then plane back to that using the electric planer, because there was quite a lot of material to take off in the end. Damn, I'm good at editing. Look how I managed to cut out the time we realised the stretcher would interfere with the bolts. And so to address some of these problems that we faced that I kind of glossed over in the video, the stretcher interfering with the bolt holes, bear in mind that I drilled the bolt holes like days, if not weeks, before making this stretcher. And although I had everything planned out on SketchUp and also on working drawings before doing the build, the only thing I didn't have drawn on there was the bolt holes, and those bolt holes ended up being what intersected with the components that were on the plans, being the stretcher in this case. So what we originally did with this was just cut these little scoops out of it using the router. There was actually a clip in the video of us doing that, but you didn't really see the final result. However, what we ended up doing after that, which was a huge pain in the arse, was actually ended up cutting those little scoops out altogether and just making it a massive scoop along the entire length, because the ribs on the underside were not going to be flush with the stretcher unless it had like curved down and met the height of them or something like that. And so we had it all bolted down and fixed and sealed off ready for a pour before thinking, oh, we got to take this out, we got to recut it and everything. And so that's the reason the frame had to come in and out so many times. Like if I'd have just spent 2 minutes drawing out the bolt holes and seeing how they interact with the stretchers, would have been so much easier. The ribs we couldn't have foresaw, because those were a later addition that we chose to add to kind of pull some of the cupping down to be flat. So that would have caused issues anyway, unless I had taken off the proper amount of material at the start and then not having to deal with cut boards, but it's on me. And thank you to Sarah for being patient with me throughout this whole thing. Oh. the countless times we had to remove the stretcher because the seal wasn't good enough, or the time we tried to fiberglass the bottom before realising I'd purchased the wrong stuff and it wouldn't go clear. Right, so the fiberglassing. Fiberglass is completely new to me. I have no idea how to do it. Never even touched the stuff before. I know it's just got something to do with epoxy. And so I watched loads of videos online of how to do it and like what the benefits were. I asked a lot of you guys about what the benefits were for using it. And I got some very clear answers of like, you don't need it for waterproofing because epoxy does that. The fiberglass itself is just there for strength. And so although I didn't need it on the reservoir, I still kind of just wanted an opportunity to try it out on something because I don't plan on building a boat or anything at any point. And it's just one of those things that's always escaped me but just seems like it's cool to be able to do. And so I thought, right, well, let's just do a little bit of fiberglassing down here and see what happens. And so we cut it down into all these small strips, got it laid out and started applying the epoxy, me having the full expectation of it going clear like some fibers seem to, but it just looked like a wet nappy at the end of it. And so like, again, credit to Sarah for this bit, because like when I'm at points like this where there's like a crossroad of what to do, and this is similar to what happened when I split the slab at the end as well. You've got one of three responses where it's fight, flight or freeze. You could get really angry, you could just sack it off and call it quits, or you can just freeze. And my one is freeze. Sometimes it can manifest itself eventually in just laughing it off, but other times, like in this situation where there's a time pressure of like, right, we need to make a decision now because the epoxy is curing, and if we don't want it on there, we need to get it off now before we can't do so. But then at the same time, I knew that taking it off would result in a huge mess. But with all of that going around in my head, I had no idea. I had no idea what to do. And so Sarah took the reins on that.
An artist knows when to say no and when to cut things out, right?
Yeah, and it's going to be now.
Okay.
Right. Abort mission! We'll leave fiberglassing for another day. I'm such a fraud. I'm not lying when I say this. The stretcher was the worst part of the project, and we still weren't done with it yet, because the next job was to test how well we had sealed it in preparation for the epoxy pours. But first, we had some riverbed designing to do, because if this so-called river table is a potential way to go viral, you can be damn sure I'm going to do it properly. Love this build-up. We continued doing thin pours over the next few days, even coming straight to the workshop after a day at the beach. So yeah, we went to Bournemouth Beach that day, ended up stopping by the workshop and doing a pour. Basically, we were trying to time each pour with the epoxy curing to what's called the B stage. I showed it in the video. It's where you can kind of push your finger into it and it doesn't get wet or anything like that, but it's still got a bit of give to it. There was times when I probably did it a little bit earlier than I should have, but it just so happened that we were in the workshop at that time and it worked out to do it then. But really, from what I've gathered at least, you should wait until it's just enough to get your thumbnail into or your fingernail into or whatever, but not leaving a proper fingerprint in it. In fact, there was one point where I came in the next day and a spider had decided to try and traverse the epoxy. And I got a photo of it on my phone. Poor sod had glued all of his legs in place. And I did my best to help him out, I will say. But I don't think it was successful. Sorry, mate. For the final pour, we needed to level the table across its width while elevating the waterfall. This would allow the epoxy to cure at an angle relative to the top of the table, so when it was levelled out again, there would be a slope for the water to travel down. Oh, mate, turn off your phone. Come on, get on with the epoxy. So as of filming this, I haven't done the Jonathan Katz-Moses cameo yet. The final pour would be cured at an angle to encourage the water to flow towards the waterfall. We had a little bit of trouble with this leaking, and by little, I mean it started little but quickly got worse and worse. Yeah, so this leak was a real problem. It just started off with 2 drips and then just went. There was so much coming out of it, and what was worse is that this underframe was pre-sanded, pre-finished and everything. We put all our eggs in the basket of like, this will be fine, and it wasn't fine. Again, it could have been a lot worse. The silicone definitely did something, but we came up with the idea of using a hot glue gun to seal it off, because my previous experience of sellotape and various tapes I knew wouldn't work because the epoxy would get under it anyway, and so we thought hot glue would be the best bet. The problem we had with hot glue is that when I was applying it, the hot end of the hot glue gun was sort of somewhat melting the silicone and opening up new seals, or pushing the silicone out the way and allowing more epoxy to flow out. So it just ended up being this thing of like, we had to apply layers to the stuff. We got through about 4 glue sticks over just that one side, because fortunately it only leaked on one side, it didn't leak on the other. But yeah, 3 or 4 glue sticks to seal it off on this surface that we'd pre-finished and everything. Like, yeah, again, Sarah was the one who went back and chipped all that off and cleaned it up and everything with the sander. So we stemmed the flow by using a hot glue gun, but not without causing a ton of mess in the process. But once it was sealed, we allowed the epoxy to harden before moving on to cleaning and flattening the top. So that time lapse of flattening, that was about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of just solid going for it planing, where it was plane, 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 sharpen, sharpen, plane, plane, plane. We had like 3 planes on the go, working on both sides, sort of spiraling round. You can see how long it took from the sunlight coming through the window, panning across the table. At the end of it, we were so fatigued that our heart and stuff were fine. It wasn't like raising the heart rate too much, but it was just like arms weren't working. They were just like jelly. It was a real struggle at the end. So yeah, as for rounding off this waterfall, I had no idea what other options there were other than a multi-tool. I was told a few times on the live streams that a multi-tool would be a bad idea because it would like crack or heat or the epoxy or something like that, but I mean, it worked pretty well for me. I don't know what the other options would have been, to be honest. Like, I guess some sort of angle grinder with a disc, maybe? The mess that was in my workshop from the router sled flattening was still present while I was doing this, and so the thought of sending more dust and stuff into the air, not a chance. Not a chance. With everything roughly sanded and cleaned up, next was the moment of truth. So as for filling some of these gaps and stuff like that, I did the underside previously, but we ended up going back over the underside to refill some of the gaps. This was prior to refinishing it again, which I guess is a reason for refinishing it, but the top took about 3 layers of black epoxy in the end, just from it like sinking into the holes and not sitting flat and little air bubbles and stuff in places. Yeah, it took a few rounds to get that all leveled off. Despite the fact I had taped everything off and applied mould release spray to the inside faces of the stretcher, the leak we previously experienced had found its way down the back of one of the legs and had adhered it to the inside. Oh, this is a pain in the arse. So yeah, leak happened down the back of the leg, and we didn't really see that until, well, I guess even if we did see it earlier on, there was absolutely nothing we could do about that because there was no access behind there. It was just like, if it's there, it's there. We just got to deal with it later. And so, yeah, trying to break it out by just deadlifting up the stretcher didn't work, and we basically just had to resort to getting the thinnest blade we could behind there, and that happened to be a multi-tool. So yeah, look at that. The inside's all pre-finished and everything, just cutting into it with a multi-tool, scratching it up. Oh my god! That sound when it came out was amazing. Like, just the silicone breaking and oh, thank god that worked.
Yeah, how awesome is that? Oh yeah, I'm like shouting at you. That the sticky tape thing on the waterfall worked.
Probably the best moment of the entire project, I reckon. Better than turning it on and seeing it work. Just the satisfaction of that thing ripping out was amazing. Not to mention the fact it uncovered this like cereal bar looking thing underneath that was kind of cool. But yeah, just words do not explain the relief that we experienced when that came out. Yeah, look at that, pre-finished inside.
I hate to bring it up, but the the inside of the leg that you are near is mangled.
Yes, it is. We just had to basically strip it all off and start again with it. Gluing up knife ferrules. So, funny thing about this assembly, we detached the table from the stretcher when we bought it in and everything like that. And we brought the table in first, got it flipped over onto its feet, and we're like, yes, it's in position. And then I sort of realised, oh, what? Frame. You need it upside down. It's got stretcher's still in the van, so we had to go back over, flip it over onto its back, get the stretcher, bolt it in place, and then flip it over, and then go, it's done! Premature celebrations. After wrestling the table home, all that was left to do was some final waterproofing, polishing, and plumbing. So as for the waterproofing that still needed to be done, obviously with the stretcher being detachable, there wasn't a very good seal between the bit that slid and the inside of each of the legs. So I just needed to seal that internal corner with some epoxy. Of course, that does mean that it's now somewhat stuck in place, but I think I could... It's a thin enough bead that I think I could just get in there with a multi-tool or something when it comes to moving this and just slice it out then. So I'm not too worried about that. And then this thing was ready to be tested. Happy we were so close to being done. So that's basically where I am with the video edit right now, because I still haven't technically finished it. It's still a mess in here. I still haven't done the final shots, but I'll do a quick walk around now so you can have a look at it. So yeah, underneath all this is the cutting board I made in the Garden Workshop series last year. The Garden Workshop series would have happened out here had this project not have taken up my entire summer. Speaking of, we also used the van to bring back the Japanese picnic benchlet. It's sat out there. It is our only piece of garden furniture, and it is just sat there on its lonesome. Well, actually, we have got a fire pit there as well. As you can see, it's getting some good use at the moment. But yeah, I'm still working on polishing out the middle, and I used it as an opportunity to purchase a Festool Rotex, the RO90 to be specific. Beautiful thing, absolutely loving it. Always have loved it, always looked for an excuse to buy one, but never had one until now. So yeah, still needs a little bit of work in here. I'm going to get some like a sheep wool pad for this, and I've got some cut and polish stuff just down here that I'm going to try and polish that up with. I did have a problem with the final layer of epoxy being somewhat cloudy though, so I'm hoping that was just the top layer of the epoxy and not the entire depth of it, because it looks pretty good at the moment, but it could certainly be clearer, I think. As for the actual pump, I'm not going to show you now because there's electrics everywhere, but I'll put some B-roll over some of the problems we had with it. Fluid?
Yeah. Cool.
Oh, yeah! Come on. Go on. Oh, God, that's a lot of water. Right, okay. Come on! Oh! Wait, what? Oh, it's coming down this way. So as you can see, the first test went horribly. The water was very biased to one side, and basically the only way I could fix that was to sand a dip into the middle of the river and the waterfall, and then give it another test. So as you can see, the second test kept the water nice and central, which was great. However, because it was all centralised too much, it caused a massive amount of splashing at the bottom. So I basically went back and tried to widen the dip to ensure the water would spread.
Okay, come on, be nice. Okay, not too bad. Better. Wait, oh no, it's going, oh. Okay, so I ended up sanding an even deeper dip into the middle here, which you can somewhat see.
but it's now at a point where it sticks beautifully to the waterfall. It loops down underneath because after stopping it splashing out the front here, it ended up coming in at too steep of an angle and was basically splashing out the inside here in a sort of V shape, landing here and on the other side, which is what I stepped in when I went to sit in the chair earlier, which is why that sponge is there being used as a test, because I wanted to see if that would prevent the water from splashing, which it did, which is why I've just taken delivery of this stuff. So yeah, I've got some fish aquarium filters. This is sort of like quite a coarse one. And then I've got a slightly finer one here, and then I've got this really dense stuff if this stuff still doesn't do the job. But I'm holding out for one of these two things, and it'll be quite nice because it will sort of stretch the entire span of the stretcher once I cut it to length. And so up there somewhere, you get the idea, it will look pretty neat still. And then I'm going to be popping the other one just around here somewhere, so if any particles still do work through, they won't get to the pump, which I'll show you now. So this is the pump, which lots of people told me wouldn't work, but now I've proven them wrong. I'm very happy about it, and as you can tell, I'm not smug at all. But yeah, that goes sort of into a brass collet thing, goes up a copper pipe, goes into a right angle bend up there, and there was a little clip of me routing out that section to get this in. But yeah, that's basically how the pump goes in. And then as for drainage, you can see we've got this little hole here. Basically, we've got this really deep baking tray that I just slot under there. And that's able to take the entire volume of this without overflowing, so that works quite well. As for the plug, I am using this. So basically the plug consists of this on the bottom, sort of bolted in from underneath. And then this one goes through the top. So this kind of sticks out of the reservoir. And on this, I've got two O-rings there, followed by a washer, followed by another two O-rings. So that sits in the reservoir, and then this gets screwed in from underneath like that. And then as for the top, that's all that's poking out. Still got a little bit of cleanup to do there, but yeah, it sits pretty neat. I can still push that back if I want, so it sits nice and flush. I don't think I'm going to adhere it in place though. I think that's absolutely fine as it is. There's quite a lot of friction on it. But yeah, almost been here a year, and we finally have a dining table. We're going to spin it 90 degrees so the waterfall is here, because then it will sit between the two sofas that we've got here. And then I'm just going to make some plywood benches for now, just to kind of test like what it's like having benches instead of chairs at a dining table, and what's a good height and things like that. So they're just going to be made out of plywood for the time being, but then I might end up making some benches in a future video. But I'm not going to overpromise that. I might just get lazy and keep the plywood benches as is. Just about to film the closing scene, got it all set up. I'll show you the startup procedure to the table. We're going to get it hooked up to a smart plug eventually over there. So we've got it on the Alexa thing over the bugger, it heard me. Anyway, we're going to get it hooked up to that, so we say something like open the floodgates and it turns on. But until then, this is how it works. So this gets plugged in over here somewhere because it's the only thing that works. And basically, you'll see. And then it sticks. It's fine from there. But look at that. Beautiful otherwise. Beautiful. So yeah, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed hearing more about the projects that I'm working on and sort of extra things that didn't make the video, then let me know if you like this format. As for upcoming videos, I'm going to be doing a lot of tutorials on the Free Online Woodworking School YouTube channel, because I basically want to update all the things I did like 3 years ago by this point, because I could do them so much better now. So that is where you'll see me hanging out for the next few months, and then we'll see what the next big project is that you'll see appearing on the main channel. So yeah, like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you at some point.